Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jamie Wallace here with another Q&A Zoom meeting for you. Today, we're going to be taking a look at lesson 8, and the plant system design is a big part of that. So we're certainly going to spend most of our time on that and answer any questions anybody might have. So yeah, without further ado, what I will do is just share my screen here. All right. So there we go, lesson number 8. So there's a couple of parts to this lesson, as I'm sure everybody is aware of. So the first part is pretty straightforward, and it's just a local plant survey. So we're just going to go through here looking at plants in your area, and again, that's pretty straightforward. Basically, just native or naturalized plants. And you certainly want to look for some qualities in those, medicinal or edible. And there's some questions that we want you to take a look at. But I think this is all pretty straightforward, and I don't see too much in the way of complication with that. Just get my chat open here. There we go. So yeah, if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to pop that in the chat here. We can take a look at it, but I think it's, again, quite a straightforward portion of the lesson. I think where people are going to have potentially some challenges is when we get into the plant system design, because now we're actually getting into some design work, and we're kind of taking a baby step here in some ways. We're starting with this very small planting scheme, we'll call it. And then we'll be moving on in the next lesson to our zone 1. So this is just a little bit of a warm up for everybody. And again, this isn't a very large planting design. It's just, it doesn't have to be. It's a fairly small area. But let's go through and just take a look at what's being asked for here. So basically what we want to do is basically a small planting plan, and we want to factor in a few things here. Hopefully we're able to get a couple of plants that are existing in your landscape and sort of build around those, build on those. So that that should be possible for most of your project sites. If you don't have any plants existing on your site, well, then we can certainly look at starting from scratch and adding a few proposed plants there. So some of the things that we want to look at, if we look at this top bit here, is want to form some sort of plant guild or plant grouping that complement each other. And it could be, in a bed. It could be a hedgerow or a windbreak. It could be, a really intensive annual perennial garden. It could be pretty much anything that you can imagine in terms of the function in the landscape. So depending on your, depending on your project site, you may have a hedgerow in there, and you may want to do a small sampling of that. I think there's a few of you that are looking at hedgerows. Maybe just a nice planting area within the landscape, close to the resident. So there's certainly a few options there for you. And again, what we're hoping to do is focus on a few existing plants and sort of build on those. And there's a little bit of instruction here. So we want to have a plan view of what you do, as well as a section view, which I'm sure most people are groaning about. It's good practice, and it's just a small section drawing, so it's not very large, shouldn't be too onerous. But we want to really illustrate how the planting is going to look, and that is that's certainly a good approach. Going to do a little narrative explaining function and the reason you chose the plants and the locations, and as well as some of the management that you foresee with that down the road. So there's a list here of some things to consider. So the ecological services and function. And we're also looking at, what the yield would be for people. Could be an aesthetic yield, could be a edible yield, could be medicinal, all of the above. And again, why have you placed these plants? What has kind of drawn you towards that? Yeah, excuse me one sec here.
Morning.
There we go. Thanks very much. Okay, so back to what we were talking about. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. So I'm going to show you, I've just got my design software fired up. So I'll just sort of give you a sampling of how you could approach this. And everybody's going to have a completely different approach. I know, for instance, Chelsea on the call here, who's the landscape architect, she would have probably a completely different way of approaching this than I would. So everybody's going to have their unique approach. So a few things we have to think about are the plants, perhaps the existing plants, what they're going to become when they are mature, and how we're going to work around those. So the one thing I would keep in mind, let me just pull up a photo here that might illustrate it. And I'll switch screens here in 2 seconds. Sorry, I should have had this one up before the meeting. Just stop share here 2 seconds and move over. So this is an image of a farm, organic farm we designed and built. Oh gosh, so it was about probably 24 years ago, which is a scary thought. But the takeaway from this that I might try and implant in everybody's mind is really thinking about all those various canopy layers. So in my experience, having that tree, shrub, herbaceous, or ground cover and vine layer are really critical in terms of overall landscape health, right? They're one of those pieces that really help drive the landscape. If you go to the Actually, if you went up, don't know if that was coming from my computer here. Sorry about that. Some strange noises here. Hopefully you're not. So if we look up at this part of the landscape, right at the edge of the forest, often what you will see is this graduation down to the ground. So if that has been undisturbed and left alone for a little while, you'll get, a small tree, shrub, herbaceous, ground cover, layers beginning on this edge. And those all complement these more mature trees that are in the background. And they are important in my mind in terms of habitat and again, maintenance. This particular landscape, it's uh, was put together to fit into an organic farm setting. And hence it has a lot of ornamental grasses, but if you kind of ignore the specific plants here, and you just see that we don't have a whole lot of space in between these plants. This is about a year and a half after planting, and things have filled in really nicely. And that's part of our approach, is we don't want a lot of exposed soil. That provides opportunity for weeds and tends to create a little more of an evaporation opportunity for water. Now, the flip side of that is if we had, say, a whole bunch of shrubs in the background here that we wanted to go in and harvest, we would have to allow for some access, some pathway or a stepstone path or something of that description. So that's one thing you want to consider in all of this, is if these are edible and you're going to be harvesting, allowing yourself to get into that planting area is a good idea. Let's stop that. Let's go back. So again, I got a little bit distracted here because when I see things like design by subtraction, that's just not the way I work myself, but this may be a good approach for you. I'm a very visual person, so when I'm doing planting schemes, I know the plants I'm working with well enough. So in some ways, I can see how it's going to look on paper before it goes in the ground. Now, the last image that I showed you, that was from over 2 decades ago, way back then, I could not do that. So in that case, we had ordered in a whole bunch of plant material, and we basically did all of the detailed planting scheme on site as we were planting. So it's not the way I like to work today, but that's how I had to do it in the past. So that whole piece takes quite a bit of time. So if you feel like you're struggling at all with this, try and be easy on yourself, and consider that, this is new. For a lot of you, it'll be new, and that it's going to take a little bit of time, to get more and more familiar with it. Yeah, so there's a couple of ways we can do this. If we went back to that image, maybe I should do that. And we're looking at ways of, and we don't want to get too, I guess this is the one tricky part, is you don't want to overthink things. But a couple of ways that we can lay out material is, for instance, these these maples here that we planted that were pretty good size. There's one here. These are dotted through the landscape, and they're creating, a little bit of unity. Let's get rid of those. And that, for these larger items, is one way we can do it. We can create specimens out of them. Now, if you look at, say, this grass here, this is northern, I believe it's the common name is northern sea oat. You can see these are clumped together, right? So with certain plants, creating groups of 3 or 5 or 7 or 9 or any odd number is a really nice way of displaying them, whereas others can sort of stand out on their own. So when you're laying out material on your design, one thing to consider is repeating or clumping specific plants. And again, you can't see this too well, but there's this purple kind of wiry herbaceous plant right there. It's called Verbena bonariensis, right? And you can barely see it, but it just creates this sort of purple haze in the back of a bed. And that's basically planted all the way through the back here, and it just pokes up. So it's ineffective as a single plant, really, but it has quite a bit of effect when it's put on mass or grouped together. So I don't know if that helps anybody at all, but we'll go back here. So again, you can do clump individuals. And that works for certain material. It's really effective.
Jamie, I got a quick question.
You certainly wouldn't want that image I just showed you. You certainly would be probably shocked if you were to put one individual plant, so that all that planting, they're all different. It would just be way too much variety. So that's one of those things you want to consider too. You want some unity. And you could do curvilinear rows. So this is a big piece for me, is the layering of the height. We can also look at perhaps it's in a little microclimate, so you can create this kind of solar bowl effect. In that last image I showed you, there was a big dry stone wall, and that created just that. It was this beautiful heat sink. Do the plants in your design support each other and minimize work? Well, in the context I showed you, yes, they do. There's minimizing of certainly of weeding and at some levels some irrigation. Now, the downside of the garden I showed you was that it requires a fair bit of plant knowledge to be able to manage those individually, to know when to cut things down, when not to. It's just getting to know your plants. So, and with that, we want scientific names on everything. And these are the elements we're looking at. So we want sort of existing conditions, so your base plan. And then we want the statement of purpose, like why are you doing this planting? What do you see the benefit being? And on your base map, you can just indicate the area that you are focused on with this planting scheme. And it doesn't have to be very big at all. And I would encourage you to go small at this point. And there's certainly no harm in that. Although with everybody's project site being so different, some people have very large sites, and a small space there may be quite large in comparison to an urban site. So just do your best at and figuring out what works for you. And then we want to see that proposed plan, and some of those details. So specifics on the plant names, some notes and a legend here, and then do a little section view, right? So we're just going to turn that design up on Edge and get an idea of what we're looking at in terms of that layered effect. And then there's a plant species matrix, which is basically a spreadsheet with information on all of those. Then we're asking about how they interrelate and how you'd go about managing those plants. So it's pretty straightforward. We have our criteria below. So you definitely want to check that out because, again, this is what I use for all the grading. And those are what some of the key parts of the puzzle, so to speak, that we're looking for. Okay, so maybe what I'll do,
Jamie, I
I
got a
don't know if
couple
anybody
questions
has
for
any
you.
questions.
Yep,
Oh,
Jamie, I do.
yeah, sorry, I've got my audio incorrectly set up here. Just 2 seconds. Here we go. Now I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, couple questions for you. First was looking back at that photo that you put up, you had those two maples back there, and I remember, I guess it was in a couple different assignments. Diversifying the trees could be helpful, especially when one might get a disease. And so I'm curious if you tend to see in your designs that you use the same trees or different species of the same to like make sure that that potential is minimized. Just want to see if you could talk to that first.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And if if we with that image, we were seeing a small part of that overall planting. Um, those maples were repeated through the landscape, but they were by no means the only um, tree component. So you're quite right. It would be, unless you had a very small landscape, I, I can't imagine, and this does happen in urban settings. Um, for us, we'll be very careful with that. You don't, the opposite end is having, let's say, you had 6 trees in an area or 7 trees, and everyone was different. When that might be tough in terms of making it look. This is just purely from an aesthetic side, not from because aesthetics and permaculture aren't always at one, right? There's no real emphasis during the course here on making things look good. That's all really in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I would agree that you want to be careful, not monocropping, so to speak. So in that case, we didn't. We did have troubles with some trees actually on that particular site, and there were some large crabapple, but they were prone to having problems. And those, out of all the plants we put in, which was several tractor trailer loads, we did lose a couple, and that was one of the issues. It was just trying to remember the type of crab. It was so long ago, and it took a few years for them to go into decline. And some of that might have been irrigation stress. So it's often hard to know for sure when things don't work out. But yeah, that's a good point. So you definitely want to be mindful of that. If we just go back to that image a second, that might help. In this image, let me just get so again, this is a maple, this is a maple. Over here we have Gary Oak. Here we have a small, I'm pretty sure there's a small, I'm not sure what that was, to be honest, too long ago. But there is a lot of variety through here. right behind this planting area is a pond with a whole bunch of birch. So yeah, there is diversity here. It's just, I think there's just a fine line there. If you don't have, this is just my opinion, if you don't have something anchoring some commonality with your plantings, it's going to feel like it's off. And in my experience, the woody end, so these big maples here, they will be big. That's just a great opportunity. And these were particularly tough, um, tough species, which I don't remember what they were, but yeah, hope that helps you out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I did have a follow-up question,
Sure.
which is uh, I'm working with a friend and they continue to throw a bunch of new ideas at me as I'm going through this class. And I've come up with a couple designs for him, but as we're getting closer to putting the final touches on these plants, how would you recommend kind of zeroing in on that plan with your clients? How do you
Hmm.
make sure that they don't keep adding to the mix at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we have encountered that. I'll just show you here what we do. All right, just got to look. Aha, there we are. Okay, take a look at that. Yeah, so what we do, and everybody is going to be completely different on this one. Um, we, with the work we're doing, we want to be very inclusive with our clients. So we allow for numerous edits in a drawing during these different, so we do, a water, access, soil layer, and all those become an overall concept. And there's 2 or 3 edits allowed during that whole process, which is great. And it's our client's landscapes, not ours. But when we get to the planting plan, I don't allow any edits to that. And what we do instead is we will produce something like this, which is a planting palette. So we're just showing people what we could potentially place within the landscape. And we want them to go through these and make sure they're okay with them. And if there's anything they don't like, we'll take it out of the mix. And then when I start the planting plan, I'm utilizing this as um, my template. Well, this is where I grab all my plants from. Um, what I have found, if this is not the best example of that, but in larger beds, say the picture we saw, if we had put that on paper and the person said, well, this plant at the back, I'm really not too crazy about, and say we had to extract a whole bunch of those off our paper copy and redo it, it could really shift the whole planting scheme and create a ton of work. So we go on this approach where we have no edits for the planting plan, but they get to make sure that everything in there works for them. And we're just sort of, so it's kind of like they're okay with the colors, and we're just doing the final little painting here, and that has worked really well for us. Um,
Do
these
you think that
are, oh, sorry, go
do,
ahead.
do you think that that's because you've given them a few different edit updates
Mhm.
with the previous parts of this project for you that they're
Yeah,
like bought into
yeah,
it at that point?
yeah. We're really sensitive about the inclusiveness part. And people, because they're involved with each layer, right? So we'll do the water layer and then we'll have a Zoom meeting and show them how we got there. And then we go through each layer like that. So they're well invested in it. So they know when they get to this stage, they're happy with the layout. They just now want the icing on the cake, so to speak. And they're confident that we'll do that for them. And they want choice. They're having choice here because they've got a selection of plants that these are typically what are available to us. And yeah, I don't see. I've not seen any issues with that at all. So I think people are, and we're very clear with it too, right? So we say it's inclusive, and at this point, it's not. So after, if they wanted to make any changes beyond this stage, it would be hourly to do so, and we'll do that. But there shouldn't be any need if we've done our due diligence along the way. Yeah, but it takes a long time to figure out a process that works for you, and you'll probably find that what works for you today, and you'll constantly be changing. And I know if I go way back to early days of design work, it was very, very different than it is today. We would basically create conceptual designs and then worry about all the details when we're installing it because we did the build. And it's a very stressful way of operating, be honest. I would not do that again. But from a creative standpoint, that's what worked for us. So hopefully that.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So there's a few questions here in the chat I should look at. Let me give a shout to plant texture. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, texture is a biggie. Funny enough, I'm doing a course right now with Javan Bernakovich on aesthetic design for ecological landscapes. And so there's so much, one can bring into the discussion, and it can over complicate things. I think like you can get bogged down by it. I don't have the picture with me, but there was a landscape that I did when I worked for the Vancouver Park System, and I renovated an area along False Creek in Vancouver. It's a lovely seaside walkway. And it was a pretty good sized bed, and I ripped out an old planting that was just pretty boring ground cover and some old shrubs, and redid it with some perennial plantings. And I did it during the winter, and I was looking at it in the summer, and I thought, how the heck did I do this? So this has been one of the challenges with the course that we're putting on is actually dissecting how one goes about this. Because for me, it's just the feel of the moment, right? Because knowing the plants that I'm working with, just doing it more on how I visualize it'll feel. So, which doesn't help anybody, right? Nobody's gonna take that away and run with it. But you're quite right, Tabitha. The texture is a biggie, color is a biggie. If we look at, say, trees and shrubs, in particular, their form, they can be apically dominant, they can be rounded. There are so many factors in there. So great point. I got another question here. Can't figure out how to paste in a picture, but boxwood, ferns, hostas, grass would be an example of all three. Yeah.
I was
And
responding to the earlier comment about the adding on of
Oh, yeah.
plants and ideas once the design's been established.
Yeah. Well, that's why we go here. I'll just go back to another part of that drawing. So this particular one, we've done our soil. So here we are. This is our initial concept. And I'm not sure why this is annotated, but at this point, we can shift gears on the type of plants we're using because the beds and all the other elements here have been agreed upon. So it gets to be, yeah. And in this case, it's funny going back to what Stefan was talking about. In this case, there was a huge amount of variety with the trees, like probably more than normal. So a lot of the repeating elements in here were shrub and herbaceous. They ended up that way. But you can see right here, these are revision notes, and we had a few revisions when it came to that after that initial concept to get to the final step here. So that's when we prefer to do the edits, not as we're getting into more detailed stuff. Okay. And Tabitha said you wish you could take it. I think you were referring to the course. And yeah, you don't want to put more on your plate, I'm sure. It's and that course will be, I'm sure, run as a self-paced item as well. So that it won't be a live session, but it'll be the recording of all the sessions that we're going to do. Okay, so Sean's got a question here. What are the layers that you include in a design? Yeah, well, let me go back to the one we were just looking at. And this is our approach, and I'm not saying it's right, it's just what we do, and it's right for us. So we start out with a base plan and sector map, and then we go to the water layer. So we're looking at all the on-site water resources that are available. So we look at the roof, any water coming across the land. We even have kind of a macro and micro watershed here. And in an urban setting, the water there's way more constrained. What you can do often. After that, we go to access. So in this case, we have just a little bit of retaining, and then we have an outdoor patio cooking area, a covered pergola with they're going to capture rainwater off the roof. They had a bunch of ICB totes already they want to utilize. And then that would overflow into a little rain garden here. And then we get to that soil layer. So this is just showing all that living material. So all the plants, turf, or grass areas. And then they just all overlay into this concept. So those are the layers that we focus on. Now, if you were, let me just go back to where we were here. When we do farm design, just let that load. You can see here with, we use the Regrarium platform, and we've been kind of training with these guys for the last 3 years. And it's a lifelong thing, especially when you look at farms. But their system has 10 different layers. So it's quite something. It's very deep. And for larger land bases, that completely makes sense. And these all overlay into each other. So part of it is is the scale of permanence, the Yeoman scale of permanence. So that's what the Regrarian platform is based on. Let's see if we can get a diagram here. There you go. So basically what it is these different layers or elements. So there's less on this scale. Darren Doherty, who put together the Regrarian platform, he has energy, and something else in there too. But the way this is set up is the more difficult and the more time it takes to change, those are the initial design layers that we look at. And then it goes down. So climate is the first one, and that's a very big, broad layer. That includes geography, that includes all your mapping, and yeah, it's huge. And then when we get down to water, that's when we really start to dial into the placing design elements on the landscape. And then you can see the roads follow the water. So access follows water, and then trees, and then structures. So often people buy property, and the first thing they want to do is figure out where the house is going. In this situation, it's well down on the list, right? So, and those structures are often farm buildings, and then fencing, and then the actual soil itself, that soil layer. So this is where the Regrarian system was spawned from, we'll call it. So there's economy, there's energy, and instead of trees, it's called ecosystem. It's a fascinating process. It really is. I absolutely love diving into new things, and that's one of them. Okay. Oh, glad that was helpful, Sean. And just curious how you distill down the process we've been through to something practical. Yeah, well, I would say if you looked at your template file, you have water in lesson 5, right? Access isn't really a distinct layer there, but for us, especially in urban, it's huge. I mean, you have to know how and where you're traveling through the landscape. That's a huge part, and that has to come before your gardens, right? So the actual plantings and all that soil layered material, it comes after those higher priority items of water and access. So if you were taking, I would look at the template file in that regard is just, what jumps out at you that I think, some climate data is a good idea. Obviously, your base map is crucial. The client interview is absolutely critical. That can't be understated. We have our own questionnaire that we go through. That's the first thing we ask people to do when they've contacted us is they'll fill in a questionnaire, and then we'll have a phone meeting with them and make sure that we're a good fit. But some of these things like site and regional challenges, those are in the back of our mind. We're not really, but we do like putting a sector map together. It's a great one. And then of course, microclimate, there's a lot of things that we do that just don't get documented that are in your template file here. So we don't do zone maps either. A lot of people do. We just don't. We don't find that helps us. Again, we're kind of, we know not to put zone 1 items out in zone 4, right? That's an obvious. So water is a biggie. And that soil, we don't often, well, it really depends on the area. If it's a farm design, yes, we're totally into diving into soil and soil resources. Let's see here. So we skip a bunch of this. We don't do that, but and we don't, honestly, we don't do a specific zone 1 design. We just do that overall concept, but using various layers. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Got a few more here. I got to get to. Does that help you out, Sean?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks
Okay.
for touching on it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to go deeper into all of this with the remaining Q&As we have. So no worries there. Zena has a question here. Oh, device. Yeah, exactly. So this is very what Zena is saying in her note here to Stefan is really documenting their thoughts. So in some ways, that's our client interview, right? Yeah, and then if people know that they can make changes and you walk them through your work, you know, you'll probably find the changes are, you know, remarkably minimal. What we find where we get some changes is in that water layer, especially if we're looking at collecting rainwater, active collection. So some people will want to do that. Others will think, well, that's something I can do later. And then I would say it's more minor when we get into access, because a lot of those are often a given, where one's going to sit, where you need retaining, that sort of thing. So yeah, those are great thoughts, Zena. Thank you very much for putting those in here. And it is it's a really interesting relationship with clients. Mostly good. But when you're starting out, it's very hard. And I know when we started out, I had a bit of content I could show people and they got excited. And yeah, that's the kind of thing I want. So that really is helpful. But there are some, I'd say the worst case scenarios are when we get somebody and they don't know what they want. A classic might be, I don't know what I want, but I'll know it when I see it. So that's often a good time for clients like that to go through like Pinterest, look for images that capture, you know, that really grab them. Okay, so Tabitha's got a comment here. Uh-huh. You have
Sorry,
a
I'm laughing
client
at
that
Zena's
just
comment.
you have a client that loves working with you, eh?
Yeah. And I realized that for him is part of the process is being really involved
Right.
and learning and doing a lot of research. So I actually wanted to ask you, how do you charge in situations where I think a full set of design plans like what you just showed us is not really appropriate for that client. It's not quite what they're looking for. I think they really want more of a coach.
Right. Right.
And I'm curious how you charge an hourly rate for that. Because there is a lot of like what Zena's saying and what was commented on earlier. There's like, I'm getting a lot of text messages,
Mm-hmm.
which is time, you know, that's your time. And I've asked
Sure.
them to just put it in email so I at least have it in one place. But so how do you go about charging for things like that? That kind of help.
Yeah. Well, if the person wants coaching, which is a
Mhm.
definitely a niche offering, right? whether that's an edible landscape coach or just a garden coach. It's a great idea, and you can just offer it hourly, and there'd be a few things you'd have to consider. As far as charging goes, that's the hardest part, is where you start with your rates. And I know when I first started, a couple decades or more ago on the island here, 27 years actually, I was charging $50 an hour for my labor to build a landscape. And I was charging 75 for design work. And it was hourly, and I couldn't tell people at that time how long it would take. And I ended up getting two huge designs, the one you saw pictures of there, and we just worked on an hourly basis, and it was just conceptual. And that's all I could do at that time. That was, sort of the limit of my abilities. But I knew when I got on the ground, and I was planting, that things would go well. And so for yourself, yeah, I would consider for instance, with your design fees, maybe that's what you want to carry into your coaching, right? So if you have an hourly fee established for that, then that kind of makes it easy.
I almost wonder, because I have a hard time, I'd probably make a terrible lawyer, but like charging for those little 15-minute phone calls and chats and things like that, which I know some people would break it down like that. And I'm wondering if it's better to say, here's a collaborative file for us, assuming that they're comfortable with the computer. Maybe here's a Pinterest page that I've started. Feel free to start dropping your ideas in, and then schedule meetings, because I would feel more comfortable charging for a meeting. And then I can say, we'll review all of these ideas, on this date.
Yeah.
And maybe we do it like that. So they can have this ongoing thought process, creative, whatever, capturing of their ideas, but it doesn't suck up all these little, 5, 10, 20-minute chunks.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I would lean towards, is getting people to consolidate their thoughts, and then you can either have in person or Zoom or whatever works for you. And then, you have your half hour or your hour or whatever it is you want, and that's that. And if they want more, well, could schedule another meeting. It's interesting, because managing, it's something I never even thought of when first got into this business, was having to manage clients, but you end up having to do that kind of indirectly with your own process. So for us, we have a very, very clear process. This is what we're doing at each step. And then our design package, when it's complete, that's it. Now, if you want more, then we'll look at providing more to you. So when we do acreage sites, we don't build in a planting plan or any details on that initial agreement, because we have no idea how much of that will be required. So we just say, well, that'll be a phase 2, and then we can price it accurately. So finding a process that works for you is probably, something that you'll discover is needed, because we had one client who kept revising, just it kept going, and it was like, no, that's enough, we're not doing that anymore. It's just got way too onerous, and we'll say unreasonable, right?
Right.
So there'll be someone that sort of pushes you into changing your approach a little bit. So,
and I do really like this phased approach too, because like just offering the advice to everyone else on the call for if you guys are at the stage of just starting out, I think that coming in on a really simple level, like right now, well, I've staged it as we're just going to do a cleanup because this massive perennial garden, it's out of control. It's never been edited. We're just going to do a cleanup, create some clear beds for him. And then and I want to charge for that and I want to get paid for it. And then I want
Sure.
to, put that behind me. And then we'll start fresh on a planting plan. And just for me personally, it feels so much less overwhelming to break it up like that because
Yeah.
like I said in my chat, I think if I had tried to give him an entire design and get him to sign off on the whole thing, I don't think we'd ever get going.
Yeah.
I think
And
we'd still be in revision mode forever.
right. Right. And that's, probably a uh more of a symptom that your client's, not sure. And no fault of your own, of course. It's just that they're, perhaps not and I think in time, as you continue your work, you'll probably discover that there are certain people you encounter that you go, I don't think this person's really a good fit for me. Because we do
Right.
that, right? So we did that a few weeks ago. It was just, no, sorry. Um, and we'll happily direct you somewhere else, but you're not going to necessarily be a good fit for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So even though when you're starting, you want all the projects that come your way, right? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's do this. Or we've done some crazy things. We did a huge project on a handshake, and it all worked out really well, thankfully. But I wouldn't be doing that again. So, but we had a really good relationship, so it was doable. But yeah, it's tricky. It can be tricky. That's probably one of the um, that was sort of the driving force of us really clarifying what we offer. And we provide I just sent out a proposal the other day to a couple, and I send along examples of our design work as examples of the deliverables. So this is what is the kind of thing that you'll receive. This won't be what you receive because it has nothing to do with your site, but this is kind of the format and how it'll look. So try and, ensure that everybody is really clear what they're getting. All right. There's just a couple more things here. Zena's got a comment. Worst kind of clients. Yeah, I know it when I'll see it. Yes, you're right. um, Actually, we had one client. So if we go back to, and I will just quickly here, go back to the image I was showing you. Uh-oh, lost my chat. Where is it? There it is. We had one client who knew our work, right? Had seen this kind of thing, said, oh yeah, we want you to do our front garden. It was a little urban. So we went in, we did that. And then a year later they called and they said, no, we're really not very happy. I'd like you to come down and take a look. Oh, sure. Came down, and it kind of was like the image here. It was, just um, an explosion of fertility, we'll say, right? Everything was doing really well, looked great. They said there's just too many plants. They were not comfortable with that kind of a display. They wanted about 3 feet of bare ground in between their plants. Well, there you go. That wasn't a good fit to begin with. But at that time, we were not going through the same process with people. But so we took plants out and then they were happy, but it was painful. So I totally get it. And Sean here's got a comment. Does anyone have a good resource for plant? Good resource for plant resources. It's organized by size, texture, color.
I feel like I've seen that on the USDA's site recently.
Yeah, that might be.
They had a lot of good keyword ways to filter your search results. I'm looking right now.
Well, you know, one thing I do, Sean, is when I'm looking at, say, doing a planting palette, which is, you know, these are plants that we could potentially use. I go through wholesale nursery availability lists and just look through those and see what jumps out at me, rather than the other way of creating the perfect landscape and then trying to find them. So that is painful when you're trying to substitute items. There's always a bit of that, but you don't want your main items substituted. So if you go that route, it really does pare down your choices quite a bit. And most wholesalers have those lists easily accessible, either on a website or they'll send them to you. So hopefully that helps you out. And Nancy's got a question here. Quick question about the set design course. I've registered, but did not get. Oh. So you've signed up for the course, but you didn't get an invite. Okay, well, I'll shoot you a note later, Nancy, and make sure that you do. Not sure what happened there. I have nothing to do with the administration of the signups and stuff. So I'll talk to Javin about that. And it is Thursday evenings at 5, from 5 to 7 for the next, there'll be 5 more sessions. And the first one will have been recorded. So yeah, no problem there. Do you have access? Well, I can talk to you later about that, Nancy. I'll send you a note, and so look for that in the next hour or so, and then we'll get that sorted out. And Sean said smart. Okay, that was with the availability list. Stefan, gotta head out. Yeah, you're welcome, Stefan. Thank you very much for joining us. And what I should do here is, just before we go, just see if we haven't covered everything on our Q&A sheet here. Right. Okay, I don't think Kelly's on the call. So I'm going to ask Kelly about this, because this is one of those questions where you need a lot of information to answer it correctly. So she's having trouble with waterlogged soils and getting rid of turf and putting ground cover in. So that might be a good choice. That might not. And Gianna had a question here about walking paths. Yeah, hardscape materials. Well, if we look at wood chips and gravel and all, those are lower cost items, but they tend to be higher maintenance. If we look at the other end of the scale, and here we'll just go back. You know, this is one end of the scale where we're using flagstone. That's the extreme in cost. And it gets less maintenance. This one was set in sand. So these are sand joints. So you do get a little bit of germination. They're often done in concrete. So let's go back. Yeah, cost effective, which is, I think what you mean is low cost, because that's cost effectiveness can be interpreted a few ways. So concrete unit pavers, we do a lot of those in the last decade. We've done primarily concrete unit pavers versus flagstone, just in terms of a cost difference, because flagstone in our area has gotten really expensive. So a lot of people just go towards the unit pavers. I quite like them. A lot of advantages to them, especially around new construction, because they have the ability to, if there is any settling that occurs, because they're units, individual units, they can be lifted and reset, versus a flagstone patio that's actually, if it's mortar set, it's usually set on a concrete pad. So failures or cracks that develop there are, we've never had them because we are very, very careful of the pad that we create, but that can be a very expensive process to fix. So yeah, often people go with gravel. That's a biggie, but then that is a very high maintenance product. So you're going to have a lot of weed germination. So hopefully that helps Gianna out, and happy to revisit these two at a later date.
One other idea on more affordable pathways is when you set a paver, like a nice big, like a 24 by 24 paver in lawn, like in grass.
Mm-hmm.
I find you can do, you don't have to do a full path of those. You can do one every, with a foot spacing in between.
Yeah, it depends on, I would say on what, I'll just go to one of our suppliers here. Like, this is just my opinion, depending on what you're trying to do. So if you have a path to the door, front door, you want that to, personally, I'd want that to be all hard surface. I don't want to be tracking in material. If you have kind of a whimsical path through a lawn area, like you were saying, you can go with larger, let's see here. They come in three, at least with these guys, their slabs come in 24 by 24, 18 by 24, and 18 by 18, I believe. I'm not positive on that, but those are quite more modern look. They've come a long way, these pavers, but like for me, I gravitate towards ones that have more of a muted color and have a more natural look. But they are still, because these fade eventually. So when they're already a gray tone, the only trouble with this particular one, of course, it's not totally flat. So it really depends on where it is, in my opinion. If it's a patio and I have chairs and a table, I actually wouldn't want this, because I could see it being a little bit tippy, but or not tippy, just things moving back and forth and not sitting right. Permeable pavers, they're pretty cool. We've done those a few times. So in a driveway, this will just, but there's a lot of underground, a lot of underground prep, because you have to manage the water as it's coming through that layer of gravel that are below the pavers themselves. But yeah, it's there are no end of choices, but that tends to be, I've always felt the hardscape is almost the most important part of a landscape in so many ways. And it's certainly been a big part of some of the projects we have done. But it really is dependent on the client, because some people want, a large outdoor living area with a little bit of garden, and some people want the opposite. They want lush, beautiful garden with just a little bit of access. So All right. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a tricky one, Tabitha. But that's stepstones is a great idea, and you can actually do that with flagstone too, which is lovely. As long as you get like 2-inch depth on the stones, so they don't move around too much.
And I've set them in, like if you set them in at the same finish grade as the lawn, it kind
mhm,
of just blends in nicely.
mhm. It does. Yeah. Eventually it becomes a little bit of maintenance because you have that
Mm.
edge, but
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, we definitely put them in landscape stepstones. So they're great for sort of auxiliary pathways that aren't used that much. Yeah, let's see here. All right. Well, I think we're all done for today. We've gone over a little bit. Sorry about that. And yeah, does anybody have any other questions before we sign off for the day?
I was going to ask you if there are any lists out there for planting guilds,
Hmm.
combinations that are beneficial to each other.
Yeah, there are. I'm trying to think of where. I might have to get back to you on that. I have seen them. Um, and honestly, other than a few exceptions, most plants are going to be paired up well with one another, provided their needs are matched, right?
Mm.
So you wouldn't put a xeriscape and a moisture lover next to one another.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'll look for that. I have seen, just trying to remember where I've seen it. There's not a lot of resources with that, but I have seen that somewhere. So I'll get back to you on that, Tabitha. Okay.
And I have just one or two more other quick questions.
Yeah.
Um, so when you do the chop and drop method, how quickly is that nitrogen released in that plant? So like at what time of year would I want to do it for a veggie garden if I kept my veggies in there
Well,
all year and then cut them
yeah.
right before planting?
Well, with veggie gardens, I approach, this is my approach. I don't, I just, we do no-till and I just apply compost to the top. So any crop, like right now, we have a whole bunch of kohlrabi that we had overwintered. That's now, we didn't use, we didn't need all of the
Mm-hmm.
crop. So we go through and we cut them right off at the soil level
Mm-hmm.
and compost that material. And then we'll add a finished compost to the top. Um, it's a different, it's a different kettle of fish when you get into annual vegetables. I don't like debris that's
Mm.
uncomposted in there necessarily. You can mulch, like once your material gets established, because we do the intensive method where we will grow our starts first and then plant them out rather than seeding them. And then we have some space in between plants, and you can certainly add all kinds of mulch in between that. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't chop and drop our veggies, so to speak.
Mm.
We still utilize them, but I would say annual vegetable gardens are a little bit different approach to make them as efficient as possible. Yeah.
Okay.
And how quickly does that all happen? Well, there's just so many variables that would be impossible to answer. Sorry about that, but
Okay.
because if you chopped it in the summer, it's wrong time of year. You need moisture to get some decomposition going. But yeah, that's how we approach our vegetables.
Okay.
So yeah. And you had one other question, or?
I was going to ask in a forest garden, if you're planting around the base of an established conifer
Mhm.
and it's very dry, like I'm trying to do a fig in an understory area of an old conifer,
Mm,
Western red cedar, is it
yeah.
okay to go ahead and put some drip irrigation on just the fig or whatever plants I have around it, or does that mess up that kind of environment for the cedar
Oh
by having
no,
too much moisture
cedars
on its
like,
feet.
yeah, cedars like moisture, right? They don't want to
Okay.
drown, but you probably find that that's one of those rare occasions when it's almost like a walnut. Western red cedar, there's only a few plants you're going to successfully grow under them. You know, they're surface rooting, and they
Mm-hmm.
definitely have a compound in the foliage that inhibits germination. So I think what you find if you try and introduce like a fig on
Yeah.
underneath a cedar, you
Okay.
know, the cedar is going to win,
Oh
even though the
no.
figs are tough. Yeah, if you get it away from the drip line and out of that
Oh,
root zone, uh,
yeah.
yeah, that's my opinion.
Huh.
I even find that when we're planting figs close to the edge of an existing forest, you get root intrusion, even from Douglas fir, and they'll find all that lovely soil and moisture, which is okay if the fig is, say, established. But if you're trying to establish something into a really heavily rooted planting, that's tough.
Hmm. That's a bummer.
Yeah, can't do everything.
Well, it's where I get all my sun.
uh,
Okay.
yeah, well, that's the reality of that's been my experience, anyways. So, but I
I'm gonna
should
move
go
forward in
here.
denial.
Yeah, well, that's easy to do, but it can rear its head, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. Well, I should go, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. I hope it was helpful, and we look forward to seeing your assignments next week.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.